Hi, everybody. Welcome to our Advocacy and Research Forum. My name is Lisa Schuster. I'm the director of the Gay Parenting Assistance Program here at Men Having Babies. We're super thrilled to welcome you here for what I think is a very fun and interesting topic. We'll be talking about surrogate stereotypes and stigmas and how that's impactful. So we have a great lineup of speakers and information to speak about tonight. But before we jump into it, I wanted to introduce our executive director, Ron Poole Diane, to give everybody a nice welcome.
Thank you, Lisa. And it is a fun subject, but also a serious subject in the sense that at these forums, we're trying to look at different aspects of, the interaction or how society views surrogacy, how we deal with legislative, societal views, as well as with the problems we indicate or we can designate as needed to require some advocacy. So this is a first of two sessions that we'll have about stigma and stereotypes. And in Brussels in November, we're going to be talking about stigma and stereotypes of surrogacy families, because that's, as we all know, even a more acute issue in European countries than it is in the United States. But the surrogates are predominantly from the United States and Canada, and we felt that this would be an adequate topic to tackle separately. So thank you for coming. The Advocacy and Research Forums are our opportunity to bring these issues from one venue to the next, or from one opportunity we have to communicate with both professionals and parents and researchers and other advocates that are interested in the topic in one location to the next, even if it's virtually. So we try to bring a component of advocacy or social issues, as well as bring in research. Each session is a little different as far as the topic is unique, but we want to provide also some continuity in the conversation, and we'll talk about it also a little later after we tackle the issue of stigma and stereotypes. But we're gonna go back to some of the previous issues we've been discussing in previous forums, and also have a look forward to forums in the fall, in addition to the one I just mentioned in Brussels. So please, Sarah, I think you're joining us now to get us started.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. Hi, everyone. We're so happy to have you here. So I'm the Director of Business Development here at Men Having Babies, and we just wanted to take a moment to thank our sponsors for underwriting this research forum. Here to say a few words about EMD Serono, we have Catherine Matzo. And Catherine, I will let you have the stage.
Thank you, Sarah. Good afternoon. On behalf of EMD Serono, thank you to Men Having Babies for coordinating this important event. From the inception of the organization, EMD Serono has worked with Men Having Babies to raise awareness and access. We're proud to be a continued sponsor and supporter of your mission, outreach, and events. EMD Serono prioritizes investments in patient access and feels strongly about supporting your organization. We recognize the importance of education about options and support to start the journey of family building. We're proud to be here today and help support Men Having Babies to close these gaps. Thank you and have a great meeting.
Thanks, Catherine. So I want to get us, actually, Lisa, you are going to go through the agenda. You take it, please.
That's okay. I'll just give you guys a quick synopsis of what we're going to be talking about. And we're also hopeful to have some time for questions at the end. So feel free to ask some questions in that Q&A tab as we go along, and we'll try to get to those at the end. But you'll be hearing from our committee this evening as we talk about surrogacy and surrogates in pop culture and the news. We did a short and sweet survey to surrogates, and we'll be talking about the results from that survey here. And then we'll be hearing from Dr. Sylvia Schneider-Fox, who's going to be talking about the research that has gone into surrogates, who they are, what their motivations are, and then linking it back to the ethical framework that we've developed here at Men Having Babies. So Sarah, I'll pass it back over to you if you want to tell everybody what and who our Surrogates Advisory Committee is.
Yeah, so one of the things that we do here is we have the Surrogate Advisory Committee that is made up of surrogates who are not working professionally in the industry. And really our mission is to educate, empower, and connect surrogates, really promoting best practices across the board in all aspects of the surrogacy journey. So a couple of our surrogate committee members who are here right now, we have Holly Bearden and we have Mandy McGlynn. And so to give you a little bit of history and what we've done in the past, several years ago, we worked collaboratively with other industry professionals and parties with a vested interest and put together an ethical framework for surrogacy. And we have a goal of really working through that again, making sure it's updated and current for where we're at now, several years later, taking kind of a dive into surrogate compensation and if and what guidelines and regulations should be around that. If we have any surrogates in the audience who are interested in joining our work and mission, we're always recruiting. We always would welcome your voice into it. And that's what we do. And so we're kind of going to just have a conversation with you about some of the work.
Thanks. So we really kind of focused in on addressing what those stereotypes are and the stigmas that surrogates face either in their day-to-day from their direct community and family, or just kind of what we see out there in pop culture and in the news. And for a lot of people, this is their first intro to surrogacy. This is, how they even heard of surrogacy as a concept. They likely don't know a surrogate personally or a family who's been built through surrogacy. And so they see them in movies or on TV or hear about them in the news. And it's often not a positive or correct light that surrogacy is shown in. I've listed a few of movies, some more known ones, Together, that just came out. Of course, the comedy Baby Mama. More Lifetime movies than you can even list or think about, all with that typical drama spin of something going critically wrong, someone being taken advantage of, a surrogate coming into this for monetary motivations, being uneducated, or with some sort of negative intent to control the situation. We also have TV shows where it might not be so negatively talked about. The New Normal overall had a positive surrogacy theme, but it involved the surrogate moving in with the intended parents. And I remember very early on, after I was a surrogate, I spoke to just a little group of guys who were planning on using a surrogate. And one guy said, yeah, we have a really great basement apartment. We'd love for our surrogate to move there. And they had kind of come to this idea in a well-meaning way, but I was like, she's got her own family and her kids, and she's really probably doesn't want to move to your basement. So these kinds of things that we see out there, really kind of shape the perspectives or shape that vision of what surrogacy is and who surrogates are, and oftentimes are not correct and can mislead people into making assumptions that aren't accurate. We also heard about it in the news, and more specifically, especially surrounding the New York legislation, which if anybody was following, there's opposition on both sides, and both for reasons talking about surrogates. And Gloria Steinem, I know, was something that was particularly difficult for me to hear, right? Because I consider myself liberal. I feel like, a woman has the right to choose what she does with her body. For me, that choice was being able to carry for another family. And so to hear Gloria Steinem's negative words talking about women basically as a commodity, or not having that ability to properly make decisions about her own body, or not having that sort of capacity to be able to make those decisions, was really, to me, very offensive that somebody would suggest that I didn't have that capacity to be able to make decisions about my own body myself. And so really, that's a pervasive liberal voice. There's certainly conservative voices out there in the news as well against surrogacy. And that's really impactful on surrogates and on our families as well. And then as part of our outreach and what we are hoping to accomplish specifically with our recent outreach from our Surrogates Advisory Committee was to kind of gather those surrogate voices. So I'm going to turn it over to Holly, who's going to talk a little bit about a survey that we just did to collect some feedback from surrogates.
All right, so what we did was we asked, we were able to get 95 gestational surrogates to participate in our survey. All of them had at least completed one journey as a surrogate. And so we asked them to share with us basically the reactions they got when they shared with their community that they were going to be surrogates. And there was a variety of reactions, which we'll go over here in a second. And of that 95 respondents, 55% of them had carried for gay couples, and then 60% had carried for domestic intended parents. And so as well with the demographics for these respondents, so a good like half of our respondents, so 51.6%, as you can see on the screen, were between the ages of 31 and 35. Whoop, screen went away for a second there. Our second group of largest group was the 22.1%, which were 26 to 30 years old. And then we had 13.7% that were 22 to 25-year-old and also 36 years old and older. And so as you can see there, none of them were under 21, which goes to kind of show that we are kind of following those guidelines that surrogates should have had at least had one of their own children, hopefully, and carried at least, two-term, gave birth, and everything before becoming a surrogate. So, and then with this, we also wanted to look at the relationship status of some of our surrogates. And so a large majority, so almost 75% of them were married. 11.6% of them were separated were unmarried, and then long-term partnerships. I can't speak. 9.5% were single. And then basically what that breaks down to is that little last percentage down there was about 4.2% were either divorced, separated, dating someone, or unmarried when they began their surrogacy or within their second marriage. And then this one was for employment status during the first surrogacy journey. So as you can see there, 61% of our respondents, so that 95%, were employed full-time, which kind of, shows that maybe they're not in it just for the money because they already have jobs. 22.1% were unemployed by choice. So they might have been homemakers, stay-at-home moms, those type of choices. 15.8% were part-time employment by choice. And then that last little bit there, which is about 1% when you break it all down, were either unemployed or seeking employment at the time.
Thanks, Holly. And, we really wanted to kind of show that breakdown of who these people are. A lot of them have full-time employment. They're, not super young. They're not teenagers in unstable relationships. They're women in their 20s and 30s in long-term partnerships. And that's who, really the majority of surrogates are these people. But we also wanted to see what those responses were when people found out they were surrogates. So Mandy's going to talk a little bit more about what the responses people got when they told their community they were surrogates.
So most of the surrogates who responded to our survey indicated that they had shared their journey with their communities, either by broadcasting it on social media or sharing more directly. And there were a few folks who described negative responses, mostly with the direct sharing. And the overwhelming majority of responses that they received were positive. But even some of the positive responses kind of show these stigmas and stereotypes that we're talking about here tonight. So next slide, Lisa. Thank you. So most of the common responses that surrogates received about their journeys, both on social media and directly, were, how can you do that? Or won't it be hard to give the baby up? How much are you getting paid for that? A lot of folks said that was a nice gesture, but I could never do that. And then there was a whole other slew of folks who just said, you're such an angel for doing this, and you're so amazing, and that's so wonderful. So there are a lot of different ways to respond positively, but even some of those positive responses really do show that people don't have a full understanding of what the experience is like.
Mandy, I'm gonna put you on the spot here. Because I definitely got the comment that I was an angel, and to me, while it in the context of being something positive made me feel uncomfortable, and like they were kind of elevating me to some sort of status that was not on par with what this was. Did you get those types of comments when people found out you were a surrogate?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I mostly received positive feedback, and definitely a good chunk of people were saying exactly, exactly these things. I could never do that. You're so amazing for doing it. You're such an angel. So yeah. And you're right, it is hard, it is a little bit uncomfortable, even though that's positive feedback.
I got very similar feedback too. And I wondered when people were saying, I mean, what do they mean when they say, I could never do that? Is it a good thing that you could never do it? Is it like, where are you going with that comment? So even in the positive comments, sometimes I think they were hinting at like, ooh, that's weird, like, so there was always an uncomfortableness in it, I guess.
Holly, what about you for your own personal experiences when you let people know you're a surrogate? What were, how did you feel in response to some of the comments that you got?
So I definitely got the whole, you're an angel, that, you're amazing. What a blessing you are. Which is, for me, it was very awkward. I don't know. It was just a weird thing to be put on that kind of pedestal, I guess, for myself. But I also got a lot of the, I did get those questions about, well, how can you just give up the baby? And I remember being like, but it's not mine. Like, it's not even genetically mine. Like, I knew this going into this, that this wasn't my child. I'm caring for them. It's someone else's baby. It would be wrong of me to not give them their baby. And just having them try and like wrap their mind around it. Because I think some of it is just that, I don't know, maybe they just don't understand the biology part, that it's not, I'm not my embryo, it's not my egg, genetically not linked. And just because I'm carrying it doesn't mean that we're somehow genetically linked. I don't know, maybe that's a failure in the school system for biology and stuff like that. But yes, but I think the most of the questions that really made me uncomfortable was when it always came to the money part. How much are you getting paid? You're getting paid for it, right? That was what made me really uncomfortable the most.
I think kind of both of those reasons, and I'll go over what our survey said in a second about what our respondents said about their motivations, but I think both of those things kind of speak to the lack of understanding that this is an enjoyable thing for us to go through. Maybe not the shots, maybe not, every little moment of it is enjoyable, but ultimately this process and being a surrogate is something that builds our own sense of joy and accomplishment. It's something that I feel added to my family, and an experience that was positive for our family outside of what we were able to do to help grow another family. But it wasn't some heartbreaking experience of me like having a child ripped from my arms, and I must be some sort of angelic being to be able to let go of a child like that. And certainly that such a fierce and negative experience that it must be for the money, that must be offsetting my sorrow in going through that. And so I think both of those really speak to how people perceive the journey, is that the surrogate is the one giving up everything, right? She's going through a painful, terrible, sad process, and is only having that money there to help rectify her immense sadness. Spoiler, not true. It was a very, almost every single surrogate I speak to grew through this process, found joy and a blessing through her own journey in helping somebody else's family grow. And, kind of looking at the motivations that our respondents have is that a lot of surrogates do this as a way of paying it forward. She was able to easily grow her own family and wanted to just help somebody else accomplish that. That was 44% of our top motivations were people who said, this was easy for me. I was able to grow my family without a lot of thought, or maybe only a little bit of trying here and there. And, you know, they're blessed with beautiful children and they wanted to pay that forward or to help somebody else have that same experience. Other people to come into it from having a personal or indirect connection to infertility, seeing somebody else going through that process or having trouble building their own family is certainly something that motivated me to become a surrogate, and it's true for a lot of surrogates as well. Other people enjoy being pregnant and say, hey, I'm done with my own family, but I really loved being pregnant. I love feeling those baby kicks and the excitement and being pregnant. I want to do it again. Other people know somebody and they want to help somebody specific that is in their own family or community group. Some less common motivations from surrogates that were much lower down, only a few respondents had these, was to provide extra income for her family or because they experienced personal loss, and this is a way for them to continue that healing process. So really those motivations there aren't, you know, to make a quick buck or to go through this, but for their own reasons of wanting to help somebody else or to pay it forward or to, you know, for me, I wanted to, you know, get that karma that I had received and send that back to somebody else. So overall, though, you know, kind of these negative perceptions of surrogates or of surrogacy are impactful, not just on the surrogate, but on her family as well. And so Sarah's going to chat a little bit more about how that does impact surrogates.
Yeah, so for me, I have a large family, and so I have many children at different ages, and it was one of the hardest parts for me to navigate was society's view about, because people assume it's happening for money, and that is a question that happens frequently. I was very conscious of people thinking like, is she doing this only to get money for her children? You know, like it was a very uncomfortable situation. And my children at all different ages experienced questions and, you know, judgments from their peers and their friends and their friends, like families, right? And so it doesn't just, when there's this negative energy around it and when there's this underlying feeling that money is a driving factor, that doesn't just touch the woman who's carrying, who's acting as a surrogate, but it directly impacts her family around her. And I think that that's important to realize, that it has reaching consequences and effects. And so we just really tried very hard to make sure that everybody knew from the beginning, like, these are the facts of this. This is why we're doing this. For me, I fall in that category of I just loved being pregnant, and I felt like this was my way to give back. And so we tried to put that message out there, but we did feel it coming back in ways where there was judgment. And so that's hard, you know, when we go into this for the right reasons. It's just really impactful when there's a negative perception out there that I wasn't just making a decision to take that on me when I became a surrogate. That affected my entire family. So I don't know, Holly, do you want to chime in with how you personally experienced that?
Yeah, so I guess I'm very fortunate for the most part that a lot of my friends, you know, have known me for a long time and known kind of my history and situation. I kind of fall into a couple of the categories. I, one, enjoyed being pregnant and had really easy pregnancies, so why not? Just don't want any more of my own. I have to, you know, I don't want to stay up all night and take care of any more children. I got my two, I'm good. But I also have family members that struggled with having their own kids and fertility issues. I have some really great friends that are part of the LGBTQ community that are looking at, you know, trying to figure out their way of expanding their families. So my overall reaction with my immediate group of, you know, peers and community was pretty good. They understood the circumstances, and my daughter, you know, of course, thinks it's amazing. She's old enough to understand what was happening. My son is not. And so she always thinks that it's amazing that I do it. And she's, of course, already asked me, are you going to do it again? Because, you know, she thinks it's great to go tell people that her mom's pregnant. And then they're like, oh, and she's like, oh, but it's not ours. She thinks it's really funny to do that. But, you know, she's 11. And most of her friends are very supportive. And so she hasn't got a whole lot of negative reactions, and neither have like immediate family. It's really just from people that don't really know us, I think. Just people in the community and in passing, that would be kind of be like, oh, well, how can you do that? It must be for the money. You're doing it for the money, right? And it's when I first signed up for Surrogate, I didn't even know what the compensation was. I was just kind of had a friend that was a surrogate. I started as an egg donor, and then a friend that was a surrogate that was looking for a surrogate for a couple that, and she was like, I think you'd be a great match. You'd love them. And I went and I met them and ended up falling in love with them. And then that's how I ended up becoming a surrogate. Like I went the total backwards way here. But it ended up being a great experience. And so I do see how, you know, you can definitely have that affect your family. Luckily, my family is very open to it, and majority of our close family members that we do have immediate contact with are very open to it. But, you know, there's always those few that are not. It definitely can make an impact on, you know, the kiddos that we have.
Yeah, Mandy, do you want to chime in with your personal history story, how this impacted you and your family?
Yeah, I think like Holly, I was really lucky that the people who know me were really on board. And I think they knew me well enough to know that if they weren't on board, they should not say that. And so, you know, but a lot of the folks who didn't necessarily know me as well, honestly would ask my husband, like, how could you let her do that? And I'm like, excuse me, what?
Take a step back.
What's that?
Just take a step back, not an appropriate question.
Exactly. So, and you know, for us, it was really a family decision when we decided to do surrogacy. And for me, it was kind of a way to like put my body where my mouth is. Like you say, put your money where your mouth is. Like some people do their activism by marching in the streets. And for me, I chose to carry exclusively for gay couples because I was out there saying, this matters to me. This is really important. And I'm not, you know, not always such a March on Washington sort of a person, but I was like, I can carry babies. That's something I'm really good at. Like, let me help people make their families. So I think a lot of folks just don't really get it. And even our family members who didn't really get it, they were pretty open to hearing about it. So I think my kids were really lucky to be kind of sheltered from that negative response, even though I heard some of it, my husband heard some of it. And yeah, there were always the questions about, oh, you know, how does that pay? How much do you get paid for that? And like, it's really surprising the way that people will ask you, like, how much do you get paid for that? You know, people won't do that for a lot of jobs. And I try to explain to them, like, there are so many better ways to make that amount of money in a year. Like, there's so many easier ways. And that is not, it's not what it's about. And I think once I did 2 surrogacies, and once I had done the first one, it was a lot easier for me to respond because, like Lisa was saying, I think it was Lisa, you know, there are so many beautiful things that we get out of the process. So I was able to really say, you know, the first time I did this, it was so amazing. It was so amazing to hand that baby to their parents and see how delighted they were. I mean, that was just like such an amazing gift for me. So I think once I had done it, it was even easier to kind of respond to those sorts of questions and those sorts of like pedestal, you know, oh, you're such an angel. Like, yeah, but I'm also kind of selfish because it makes me feel really good.
Right. I get to give back and do something bigger than myself. I think even in just this small conversation, what strikes me is that the immediate people around us, right? Like our close group, our family, our friends that know us. It's not necessarily negative reactions from them. It's kind of outside. It's the people that this is weird to. They don't individually know a surrogate themselves. And so then it becomes that much more influential when there's these negative movies and negative stuff out written about it. If you don't know anyone who's ever done it, that's your only exposure to it. And so it's not like there's a whole bunch of surrogates out there, right? Like there's a good number of us, but not everybody knows somebody personally. And so it's easier to agree with and go along with a stereotype when you don't know somebody in real life. So I think that's kind of a take-home message I'm hearing just in this conversation.
I definitely felt that I needed to, one, be ready to list my reasons for being a surrogate, to be that person to educate everybody I came in contact with about surrogacy. But I also felt that I needed to arm my children with that knowledge too, because they were the ones, talking to their teachers or talking to their classmates about this in a setting where I wasn't. Nobody's going to ask me, right? A few people did ask me if I was pregnant, which, is usually a no-no. But most people are like, I'm not going to ask, but I'm going to ask her kid, is your mom pregnant? And my kids are going to be the ones that are going to have to explain it. And my son, especially for my second surrogacy, he was in 3rd grade, and he did explain it, although not 100%, because he was telling his teacher it was my 5th pregnancy, and she came out to me and says, "Oh, Jacob tells me that you're a surrogate and you're pregnant with 5 babies." I was like, nope, definitely not 5, only 1. But I know that, it was on him, a 3rd grader, to be able to explain surrogacy and at least in a way to communicate with people asking questions. But I knew that he would need to have that knowledge and that ability to explain it, however well he did. Because that, people have these misconceptions, or, the only exposure to surrogacy has been through the media, through pop culture. And so, it's not Lisa, that PTA mom who's a surrogate, it's, Amy Poehler from Baby Mama, and so it's my children having to go out there and explain why it is that their mom's pregnant, but they're not having a sibling. It's me ready to explain to my neighbor, that I'm pregnant, but it's not my baby, because there was no hiding my pregnancy. By the end, I'm always very, very obviously pregnant. So I did have to explain to our neighbors and our mail lady. I felt like I needed to explain it to as well, because I see her every day, and I wanted her to know why I wasn't going to have a baby after I stopped being pregnant. But it is, I think, I felt the need to arm myself ready to explain surrogacy, explain why I was doing it, and my children to be able to explain themselves out in the community, since they were, my first journey, they were all still pretty young, and I was their spokesperson, if you will, telling their preschool teachers and telling their community. But by the second one, they were having to go navigate those conversations on their own with a lot of people. And I knew that they were, I would have loved to, everybody to have that understanding of surrogacy. And so my kids didn't have to come fully ready to explain it or handle any questions. And I know that also from people who had older kids when they had surrogates, I would talk to some guys in our program, and their surrogate had a teenage son, and he, when his friends found out, they were like, "Oh my God, that's so gross. Your mom slept with them?" And so then he has to, be like, "No, that's not really it." But one, they could have not said anything and just gone around assuming. But also, that's, a lot for a teenage kid to have to try to explain to his friends. And then he might feel outcasted, right? Nobody wants to hear like, "Oh, your mom's so gross." And so these things really, that lack of understanding, that lack of knowledge, but just also, the only exposure so many people get is these, parodied characters or these inaccurate representations. And so then it leaves that burden on a surrogate and her family to have to explain that, to have to navigate those discussions on their own. And so I think it's an interesting thing to look at, and an important thing to really consider what that impact is on a surrogate and on her family and on the communities. But I think bit by bit, as we get our voices out there, as we continue our education and awareness about surrogacy and surrogates. I think that will continue, hopefully, to change, and as part of our mission with the Surrogates Advisory Committee. So I want to thank Holly and Mandy for joining us here on this presentation. Holly at least will be around after to talk with anybody if anybody has questions. But please, anybody interested in joining our outreach and mission and the Surrogates Advisory Committee, we really welcome your involvement, and you can reach out to us, team at menhavingbabies.org, or one of us here this evening for more information. And now we're going to kind of shift in our discussion of the evening. This is really more experience-based and talking from our own personal decisions. And now we're going to hear from the more research side of things. We have the absolute pleasure of having Dr. Sylvia Schneider-Fox joining us this evening to talk a bit more in depth about the research and all of the more scientific research that's gone into this. So I'm going to turn it over to Sylvia.
Well, you guys pretty much summarized the research for us, because everything that you said pretty much covers what we know from studies. So let's start by acknowledging that there's not a lot of research on surrogacy in general. And certainly we don't have all that much research on the demographics of surrogacy, on the characteristics of surrogacy. So what I'm going to be talking to you about is going to be in part based on a handful of studies. And I will tell you, the MHB study is starting to kind of inch up there as one of the bigger studies we've got. As you can see, the biggest study to date is a 2016 study by Fuchs that was published in Fertility and Sterility, and they looked at 204 surrogates, or either who were getting ready to start a journey or who were already pregnant throughout the country. And the demographics, what we know about sort of the demographics of the typical surrogate is pretty much mirroring, I think, that what you all were finding in the MHB research. The majority of surrogates across the nation were white. First study that was done in California, around San Francisco, and there was a number of Asian surrogates there, but in and around the rest of the United States, the majority is white, and both by race and by ethnicity. Most of the surrogates have some education. Most of them have high school diplomas, associate's degrees, BAs. It so happened, just interviewed a surrogate last week who has a doctorate, and I've had several clients or several surrogates that I've assessed over the years who have doctorates and want to do this for the reasons that our panel has shared and that we'll talk about a little more later on. Again, income-wise, most of the surrogates are pretty much kind of solidly in the middle. One of the things that people don't always understand about surrogacy is that surrogates cannot become surrogates if they are on welfare, if they receive government support, if they are in dire financial need. And when I'll talk about the kind of things that we look in the screening of surrogates, we talk about coercion by someone else, but we also talk about sort of financial coercion or financial pressure, where if a surrogate is in such dire straits financially that she needs this income to survive, then she cannot really make a rational, clear decision. She's really motivated just by the financial need, and therefore she's not a she's a surrogate who's going to be vulnerable. She's not entering this really with her eyes open and with ability to give informed consent. And again, most surrogates are either employed full-time, part-time, or the majority of the ones who are not employed used to be employed, but they are now stay-at-home moms. And then what we see is that there's a great number of carriers who come back for second, third, and sometimes fourth journeys. Again, like we have on our panel, people who, for reasons that I'll talk about in a minute, want to repeat this journey. And I think it tells you something about the success of surrogacy, that you have almost a third, according to this research, who comes back to repeat. All right, so let's talk about the motivations of surrogates. So as we've heard from our surrogates, there's such great deal of stigma, and I think, Lisa, you said it very well, summarized it very well, that the stigma is based on these assumptions that we make as a society. One is that this is a surrogate's child, and that there's something wrong with the surrogate that she parts with her own child. And in part, that's based on misunderstanding of the technology, misunderstanding of the relationships, and really not an ability to recognize that this is, like you said, Lisa, this is not your child. Surrogates are very clear that this is the intended parent's child. Almost invariably, you'll hear surrogates say, if I wanted another child of my own, I would have another child of my own. And it's amazing to me how much that fear of the surrogates are going to get attached to this baby as their own, how much it still permeates both the culture, but also the psyche of the intended parents, because intended parents are still so frequently afraid that somehow the surrogate is going to come to see this as her own child and not want to part of it, with it. And if you just listen to surrogates like we did, like we're doing tonight, you're going to see that it's very, very obvious that this is the parent's child that they're carrying. And therefore, the primary attachment for most surrogates is not to the baby. The primary attachment throughout this journey is to the intended parent or intended parents, because they are doing it for them. They're doing it for the adults. And that's where the primary relationship lies. The other assumption that our society has is that pregnancy is a horrible thing. Why would you want to be pregnant? Why would you want to give birth? That's a horrible thing. That's labor, literally and metaphorically. And there's no joy in pregnancy and childbirth. And once again, there are many women who loved being pregnant, who loved giving birth. And again, when you talk to intended parents, that's very hard for them to comprehend, because people who come to this especially from the side of infertility, come to this after years of finding pregnancy, the attempt to get pregnant, childbirth if they've already had a child, extremely difficult, extremely laborious, extremely painful emotionally and physically. And they cannot comprehend that for someone that would be really joyful and wonderful, and that in and of itself, the miracle of growing a life within you is something that women want to experience again and again, even if it's not in order to grow their own family. So then these two assumptions give rise to the third assumption, which is, well, if you don't do it, if you're gonna, if this is something that you're not doing because you love it, then why are you doing it? You must be doing it either because you're very greedy, because you want the money, or because you need it. Poor you, right? So there's either this kind of sense of the surrogate on some level being a predator who just wants to take the intended parents money, or kind of this victim who is this poor, needy, uneducated, um, financially vulnerable person, and that must be her real motivation. And as you heard from the panel, not only does it hurt the surrogate, not does it only hurt her family, but I see it all the time because I facilitate surrogacy journeys and I facilitate interactions between surrogates and intended parents. It hurts the journey itself because it's constantly it's such um, a deep mistrust that our society kind of uh, reinforces, that intended parents have to get over and build their own ability to trust the surrogate and come to see that she really is not coming to this either from a place of greed or from a place of need. So the reality, as you've heard from the panel, is that surrogates do this because they liked being pregnant, they liked feeling life grow within them. They don't necessarily love being in labor, but they love the moment of seeing a child come into the world, and the idea of seeing a child come into the world and the intended parents being there waiting for this child is the highlight that just about all surrogates talk about, and certainly repeat surrogates again and again will say, that moment when I saw the intended parents get their baby and finally hold their baby, and I could see the three of them become a family, was one of the most important and significant and life affirming moments of my own life. So there is this sense of I'm doing something really important, I'm doing something very life affirming, and I'm doing something unique. And there's an adventure in this. I loved it because I was talking to a couple the other week who said, this is a life adventure that is so wonderful, and what an opportunity we have to embark on this with another family. Um, as you've heard before, some surrogates feel that they're paying forward or they're paying back. I had many surrogates who have had an event in the past where they benefited from the generosity and altruism of someone else, and they wanted to harness that and pay it back to society to kind of repair the world a little bit, to make it right a little bit. Sometimes you hear from surrogates who have had a traumatic event, sometimes women who have terminated pregnancy, who feel somehow that by bringing another child into the world, they're kind of repairing, they're kind of evening out the world. And there's that motivation can be a little tricky, and I'll talk about that in a second. There's great deal of empathy for people who are trying to conceive, both for people who are struggling with fertility, and many surrogates have known people who have struggled with fertility, or for same-sex couples. There's a lot of surrogates who prefer same-sex couples, both because of their beliefs, because it's an opportunity to really um, sort of walk the walk or vote with your body, but also because many will say, this is something that I can do as a woman that a same-sex couple can't have. And this is a way in which I can use my being a woman in a way that is completely unique and completely helpful. Um, Often the surrogates will say that the financial motivation is there. Sometimes stay-at-home moms would say that this is a way for them to contribute to the family. This is a way to just add a little bit of um, help because they're staying at home. But it's very clear that the financial motivation is not central. And certainly in screening the surrogates, that is one of the very first things that we look at, an ability to enjoy and benefit from the compensation that they get and so well deserve, but also an ability to see beyond that and to get value for themselves beyond the monetary value. When you look at subsequent arrangements, when you look at why do surrogates come for a second time, you can see that many of them want to help a family give, for example, if they come back to the same family that they carried for the first time, they're going to want, they want to help that family have a sibling for the child. Many of them have had really wonderful experiences of surrogacy. Some of them didn't. Some of them had journeys that didn't turn out well, and they want to repair that. They want to have an experience that is different from the first one. So when you look at all this motivation, you really understand that most of the surrogates that we get really are coming to this from a place of having the heart be in the right place. But when we do, as psychologists, an assessment of a surrogate, we also look for possible motives that can be the wrong motives. And what I mean by wrong is that they typically set them up for having unrealistic expectations. So I said before that sometimes surrogates want to pay back for something or to make the world a little better. But if you are, as a surrogate, doing this from a place of guilt or in a place of some sort of an emotional injury or emotional trauma that you had or something painful that happened in your past, and you think that this is going to repair it and this is going to make you feel better and it's going to redeem you somehow, that sets you up for expectations that might not get fulfilled necessarily in the journey. There's no guarantee that the surrogacy journey is going to do that for you. Another motivation that you see with surrogates sometimes is the need to be special, a sense of grandiosity. I will be so special in these people's lives. They will never forget me. I will be so central to their life stories, to their child story. And many times that's true. But again, there's no guarantees, may or may not. And kind of this narcissistic need to get the acknowledgement and the recognition that will make them feel better about themselves can bring stress into the journey itself, because then the surrogate constantly looks at the intended parents to gratify that need, to shower her with the attention and with the recognition that she's so hungry for. That often you see in surrogates who are drawn to work with same-sex couples. You hear sometimes from surrogates who will say that they prefer same-sex couples, that there is kind of this fantasy that she's going to become this central woman in these guys' lives, and that forever she will be, and she will become the central woman in the child's life because she's the only woman that contributed, in addition to the donor, to the child's story, but she's likely to be kind of part of it. And again, it's a setup. So those are motivations that we kind of try to, when we do the psychological screening, to really assess and be very mindful of what exactly goes in here, because it's a setup for the surrogate and for the intended parents. So I'm talking a lot about the psychological screening, and I want to focus on that because what people don't understand is that so much of the stigma is based on not understanding that only a very small number of surrogates passes or meets all the criteria that we're looking for in a surrogate, and that the psychological screening is so thorough when it's done right, when it's done by a professional, when it's done by the book and ethically and by the guidelines of those of us who are educated in this field, that we really screen out both people who are emotionally vulnerable to become somehow destabilized by this journey, people who are somehow vulnerable to be triggered by this journey, and people who are entering this for the wrong reasons or who cannot really sustain the stress and the demands psychologically and from a relational point of view of a surrogacy journey. So what do we look for? We first of all we look at the motivation. So again, as I said before, we want to see those motives that I've talked about before. I actually do want to see, many times you'll hear surrogates say, look, I would do that even if money didn't exchange hands. I, as a psychologist, tend to prefer surrogates who can sort of own that they're getting compensated and that they deserve to be compensated, that they can own and recognize that this causes a great deal of disruption to their lives and to their families, that they're taking a risk, that there's a great deal of discomfort, and that they deserve to be compensated for that. And they can be okay with that and go into this, but not just for the transactional and contractual part of it, but also as for the relationship benefits and the altruistic motives that we talked about before. We look at the expectations, as I said before, understanding that a surrogacy journey can be a wonderful thing, but there's lots of bumps in the road and things don't go according to book, and there can be losses, and there can be physical discomfort, and as you imagine this kind of pregnancy that resembles the ones you've had, it may be completely different. So understanding that you have an image of how this journey is going to go, but it very well may not go that way. We obviously want empathy and compassion. We want people who are really able to see the point of view of the other side, so that anytime there is a misunderstanding or conflict or friction in the relationship, which it will be because it's a relationship and it's a long relationship, it's months and months, and in any relationship people get on your nerves, but you want to be able to have some empathy and compassion and ability to see the other side so we can negotiate those bumps in the road. The ability to give informed consent is very central to what we look for as psychologists. We look for the cognitive ability. We look for people who have who are together enough, cognitively intelligent enough, and organized enough to understand all the pieces that go into the process, so that when they consent, they really understand what they're consenting to. And we look for people who have the emotional and the understanding, both financially of what this means, and understanding that they will be doing this not from a place of need or coercion, but from a place of, I truly know what I'm getting into this. I'm going into this with my eyes open. So for all of this, we want someone who is mature, who can demonstrate that they have good judgment, who is thoughtful, who has made other decisions in their lives about themselves, about their family, with thoughtfulness, with maturity, and who can really show that they're thinking about this in this well-rounded way. We look for ego strength. We look for people who are able to tolerate the bumps in the road, who have resilience, who have the psychological flexibility and the coping skills to pivot if they need to pivot, to deal with loss, to deal with the possibility that the outcome is not the outcome you hoped for. And then we look for relationship skills, an ability to set appropriate boundaries, an ability to have appropriate assertiveness. We don't want people who are going to be unhappy with the process in some way and not talk about it and harbor bitterness throughout the process. So we want people who have good communication skills and healthy boundaries, both by way of setting boundaries to the intended parents, but also setting boundaries to society and other people, because as you can see, there is a lot of crossing of boundaries by misinformed family members, friends, random strangers who say things that are inappropriate or ask things that are inappropriate, and the ability to answer in a way that is boundaried, that is um, assertive and communicative and educational, is because the moment you become a surrogate, you also become an educator and you become an advocate. And you have to be able to be an advocate and an educator yourself. And as you've heard, I think from Lisa, you have to become, to help your children become educators and advocates as well, especially if you are working for a same-sex couple and you also become an advocate and an educator who has to confront homophobia. So what are specifically the kind of things that we look at? What do I ask about? I look very deeply into the surrogate's history. I scan her social history, her sexual history, her financial history. We look at her legal history, and very deeply into her own psychiatric issues and her family of origin psychiatric issues. How much mental illness, and how much distress was there in her family, not necessarily because these are deal breakers, but sometimes because you want to be able to flag issues that will make her vulnerable at certain points of the journey. You want to be able to say to her, look, you need to know that, um, let's say you've had some sexual trauma, the process of the medical process can be very intrusive physically and emotionally, and it might be difficult for you. So keep an eye on yourself and see how you're responding. And you might need to reach out and get more support because this might be more triggering than you realized. We look at the partner's mental health and support. You know, we talk so much about the surrogates here, but having a partner who is stable, who is on board, who understands the process as much as she does, who is going to be able to take upon himself to carry a lot of the burden that might fall upon him throughout the journey, and who has his own support network to turn to if he needs to, if this gets to be difficult. Of course, we look for any kind of abuse, sexual abuse, substance abuse, emotional, physical abuse. And again, they're not necessarily deal breakers, but we want to see how they have coped with those, how they have dealt with them. We certainly want to make sure that those are in the past and that the person is not vulnerable in any kind of way to any kind of addiction or any kind of crossing of boundaries. And the same with trauma and loss. Most of us have had some kind of trauma. Some of us, many of us have had some kind of loss. I don't look for a surrogate who doesn't have baggage. I look for a surrogate who has been able to negotiate her baggage in ways that are healthy, in ways that she has become more resilient from and stronger from. And then the last thing that we look at is the stress level within the family. We look at how stable is the family right now. These days, we're looking at how are they dealing with COVID? Are they able to negotiate COVID and a surrogacy journey? What stressor are they facing in the future? You know, if you have someone who, let's say, has a child with special needs who's about to start school, well, next year it might be a difficult year. Will they be able to negotiate the child's needs, the child having an IEP, for example, and the demands of surrogacy? So you want to make sure that both now and throughout the process, they will be in a period of their lives that is conducive to adding this significant stressor to their lives. So in all of this, what you can understand is that you really want to make sure that surrogates are treated with the respect and the ethical protection that they deserve. So understanding that there is a great deal of vulnerability in being a surrogate, that you are putting yourself out there really more than anything for a relationship where you can be exploited, you can be abused in some way if there aren't guidelines who will protect you and who will make sure that this journey is done well and thoughtfully. So that's where the Men Having Babies ethical guidelines come in. And if you're not familiar with them, I definitely suggest that you familiarize yourself with them. But the basic pieces of our ethical guidelines are that you really have to make sure that you obtain informed consent from a surrogate, that she really understands what she's getting into. You really want to make sure that a surrogate is afforded the medical, the social, and the psychological screening that will ensure that she comes into it with the strength and the capacities that she needs in order to be successful in this. And that she really has her own team. She has her medical team, she has her psychological and a mental health support team, and her legal representation, all who are set up to help and support and protect her interests in the process. And that's how you know that the surrogate that you're dealing with is not going to be any one of those surrogates that you see in those caricatures from the media or in the Gloria Steinem op-eds, but really the strong, thoughtful, and empathetic women that we see in everyday life when we work with gestational carriers. And this is me.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. And she talked about our ethical guidelines, and they are available on our program companion page. We'll be talking about them a little bit more in our sessions on Saturday and Sunday, but we really recommend reviewing them, reading through them. You can find them on our program companion page. But as Sylvia was saying, that really, you know, there is that potential for someone to be taken advantage of, or for the situation not to be this wonderful experience that Holly, Mandy, Sarah, and I spoke about earlier. And really, by following these guidelines, by making sure all of these screening steps that Sylvia talked about are followed, helps to really eliminate that possibility, to help avoid these situations that, you know, potential to read about in the news that cast surrogacy in a bad light. Because while that potential is there, these guidelines help to make sure that the women going through this are motivated for the right reasons, for coming through a journey with the proper expectations and understanding of the process to avoid these negative experiences, or the possibility of, you know, keeping the baby, as everybody's always afraid of, which, you know, is always the comment I get from intended parents as I'm talking to them in the program, that they're worried that the surrogate's going to keep the baby. I myself, as a surrogate, I was worried that the parents were going to take the baby. I said, I don't want, what do I need to make sure I sign so that I don't end up with the baby at the end? So it's really important to follow these ethical guidelines and to make sure that you're imparting, whether you're a surrogate or your intended parent or you're a professional in the industry, following these ethical guidelines and conducting the journey, making sure all of those screening steps are taken, and that everybody is fully on board, has, you know, a full understanding of the entire process, and hopefully to have a smooth as possible journey. But I do think we have some questions, and if you guys have any out there, feel free to type them in the Q&A tab. The question was about the surrogate support group. So feel free to email us at team@menhavingbabies.org. We're happy to give you more information about that. We are going to have opportunity after this presentation to kind of talk in small groups, but if we have any questions kind of for the group here, for Sylvia, for Holly, Sarah, or myself, we're more than happy to take questions now. If not, we're going to break into small groups for a more interactive platform here. So a good question came in, and I'll read it, but Sylvia, I'll have you answer it first. What is the best way for future intended parents to assist a surrogate to create healthy boundaries?
The key is communication. The key is transparency. So, assuming that the surrogate has the capacity to have healthy boundaries, I think that boundaries get established through negotiation. And first of all, a basis of liking each other. I mean, having a relationship, building a relationship. That's why when you meet with intended parents, the first meeting between intended parents and surrogate is often so important because this is kind of the beginning of a relationship, and you need that basis in order to have the negotiation that comes afterwards. So you have to be able to say, look, I would like to tell me what is the frequency that you feel most comfortable with by way of us talking. I want to hear about what's going on with the pregnancy, but I also recognize that you have your own life and you're busy, and I don't want to be on top of you. What do you feel comfortable with? So giving the surrogate a platform and permission and inviting her to specify what her boundaries are and what she's comfortable with. In same-sex arrangements, it's really important that actually that intended parents talk about their comfort or discomfort with talking about female issues. Lots of guys are very intimidated by the idea of asking a surrogate intimate questions, right? About her cervix and about her uterus and about her hurting boobs. But they want to know. So when I work with surrogates who are going into a same-sex journey, I always invite them to be the ones who give the intended parents permission to ask those questions, because it's very liberating for the intended parents to know that they can go there. I also invite the surrogate's partner, if it's an opposite sex partner, if it's a male partner, that to give permission, because sometimes, again, guys don't feel comfortable stepping into what might feel like the guy's territory. So putting those issues on the table, saying, I'm not quite sure what you feel comfortable with. I'm not quite sure what I feel comfortable with. Can we talk about it? That's how you establish the healthiest boundaries.
Just, speaking from my experience, it was really a nice way of setting boundaries and communicating with my intended parents. And especially when it came to closer into the delivery and when they were attending appointments with me, they always said, we'll come into the room when you let us know, Lisa. So they didn't have any assumptions about coming right in. They always gave me the opportunity to speak, one-on-one with the doctor, to get myself changed, to get myself ready. And just really that communication that Sylvia was talking about, of them saying, Lisa, when you're ready, you let us know. We want to be here. We want to be present with you when you're ready, when the time is right for you, and giving me that ability to say, yes, please come in. Let's have our appointment now that I've, taken my pants off, but got the robe on and all of that. And so it's just that communication, and they're letting me say, yes or no, but not having to say, gosh, this is making me uncomfortable. Can you wait outside until they set that expectation and they set that communication up first? I don't know if either of you want to chime in, or we'll move to the next question.
I think you answered that one very well. So if we look at the next question, I see we were asked, how long does the typical surrogate and IP relationship last after the birth? And I think it's a great question, and I don't think any of us will necessarily have the same answer. And so that is absolutely something that at the beginning of a journey, I think it's important to establish what you're looking for, right? And so we have some surrogates that come into this process really hopeful that they'll have a lifelong connection with the family and the baby that they help bring into the world. And we have other surrogates that that's less important to them. And so being on the same page with the surrogate that you work with at the beginning, I think is just so important. And sometimes we have people come into it, right, that say, oh, we'll just see how it goes. And organically a relationship develops or doesn't. And so there's really not a right or wrong answer to that in my perspective. Do you want to chime in, Holly, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I'm kind of that person that as a surrogate, I always, when you first meet intended parents, you kind of negotiate what the like what kind of communication would you like to have? Do you want to like keep contact, weekly or monthly, attend the appointments, be in the birthing room? You go over all that. And then as well, part of that is, after the birth, what are you kind of expecting? Are you wanting that distance afterwards? Are you wanting to stay in contact? And I've been a surrogate twice, and both of my surrogacies, the parents would ask me like what, kind of what my comfort was. And both times mine was, it was up to them. I kind of let them lead the way with that, because once the baby was born, I was very much well aware that I was no longer going to be the focus of their attention, because now they have the baby. So they were going to be, all of their attention is going to be to having this newborn. They're going to be the newborn parents. They're not going to have the time necessarily to stay in touch as much. And I understood that. And that is very much, I know that Dr. Sylvia had mentioned earlier that, that bond with the parents is really more of what is harder on a surrogate necessarily than giving up the baby, because we're not giving up the baby. It was their baby to begin with. But it is hard. It's almost kind of like your best friend moves away, and then now all of a sudden you're not in touch as much as you were. And so I was very open with them to negotiating whatever was comfortable for them. I understand them needing that time to themselves with their baby to adjust. But I also understand if they want to stay in touch, I was open either way. And so we kind of just talked about it. And like one of my couples is in Belgium, so we don't see each other very much. We communicate through text and through Facebook chat, and we're friends on Facebook, and we keep connected that way. But it's not like we're really getting to hang out and see each other very much. And it was like that during the pregnancy too, because they were overseas. I'm here in Texas. So a lot of our communication was through video chats and Facebook and text messaging. And so our communication is not as close. They do touch base and send me pictures regularly through developmental milestones and stuff. And he's like 2 now and adorable. And then my most recent one, they're like 30 minutes up the road. So like we can be in touch a lot more, but they've chosen to be a little more distant. And I respect that. They have their own family. They've got their own thing going on. And so I basically just let them know, if you ever want to get together, reach out to me. I'm open to whatever works for you. So really just communicating with your surrogate and figuring out what works for both of you, and just being transparent about it. Don't be shy, kind of put it all out there, because it's a lot easier to put it all out there at once and put it on the table than to when you hit that point and it gets really awkward when you're not on the same page. So just being transparent definitely helps.
I want to add a couple of things to that. So seeing a lot of journeys and talking to a lot. The first thing that when I get this question, and I get it often from intended parents, I tend to sense some fear behind this question often, that intended parents sometimes have this fear, and maybe that's kind of based on stigma and movies and Amy Poehler, right? That you're going to have this woman coming to your life, and now this is it. She's moving in with you, and for the rest of your life, you are going to have her at every birthday party and Christmas, and this is going to be your main, you are building a lifelong relationship. So I think that a lot of times what intended parents expect is quite unrealistic. When I talk to surrogates at the beginning of the journey alone and ask them about what their expectations are, I would say 99% of the time, what the surrogates will say is, I would love to hear about how this child kind of grows through either Facebook or social media or the occasional Christmas card or birthday photos. Most surrogates want kind of just a loose keeping up and knowing what's happening with this kid once in a while. But I don't think I've ever heard someone say, "Oh, I want us to be friends for life," or "I want us." By the way, it would be a red flag if she did. The other thing that I wanted to say is that, Holly, the conversation that you're talking about, kind of at the beginning of the journey, is really important. But what I have seen over the years is that it's good, and it's important to kind of talk about it. But the truth is that it's a relationship of a year or longer from when you start until the baby's born. So by the time it's over, you might end up in a very different place from where you started, one way or the other. So a lot of times there will be people who will say, "Oh, once the baby's born, we're gonna just have loose contact." And then it turns out they really hit it off, and now every so often they meet, and every so often they go and if you're in a different city, when you come to their city, you meet and have dinner with them, and vice versa. People who thought that they were going to have this close relationship, and in the end, like you were saying, Holly, they go home and now they have diapers and sleepless nights to deal with, and you come back to your own life. And in the beginning, maybe you have a little more contact, but 6 months into it, you just exchange Christmas cards.
I think that's so true. And I think that, the stereotypes really are, either this purely transactional relationship where there is no other emotional relationship, or the new normal relationship where, your surrogate moves in and your families are inseparable from here on out. And the reality is that it's usually just somewhere in between. No right fit or right answer for anybody. It's how these relationships grow and develop. But, tends to be, I feel like Sylvia pulled exactly my response from when I was asked very early on what my relationship, and she didn't even do my sex screening, but that I said, I want to know in some general way where this child is. If it's a Christmas card or a Facebook update, that's enough for me. And whatever then that relationship will grow or not grow into be is totally fine. And I think that's, the usual case for most surrogates.
And I think, yes, I think that that's kind of the usual outcome for most journeys. I would say the typical journey, that's how it wraps up. That you remain loosely in touch either through social media or through the occasional card, and that's typically what I see from parents years later, or surrogates who come back.
So I have one more question, and then I think we'll break to our tables for some further discussion here. But the last question is, what can we do as the professional community to reduce the negative stereotypes associated with being a surrogate? Anybody want to take that one first?
I can take that for a second. I mean, I would say that I think that based on everything that we say here, increasing the visibility of real surrogates, letting people see what a surrogate looks like, sounds like, having really combating the stereotype always takes knowing someone who defies the stereotype. So I think that increasing the visibility of your surrogates, being vocal, educating, advocating, having a voice, saying, "I've been to this forum, I have heard surrogates talk, this is not true," in very small way, like any stereotype and any kind of bias, we kind of change the negative images one by one, person by person.
So I want to add to Mandy, who isn't able to finish this out with us, but she actually specifically said she feels that surrogates ourselves can play a really big role in helping to combat the negative stereotypes that surround us, right? If we are out there using our voices and showing people we're normal people, we're not doing this for the reasons that drama shows and sitcoms portray, and really just being visible and transparent about why we're doing this. I think that combined with, like you said, the professional community also advocating for us and doing their due diligence to do everything you talked about, Dr. Sylvia, to screen surrogates so that it is the surrogates who should be carrying that don't fall into those horrible negative stereotypes. They don't get through, right? They're not able to carry because we're doing this ethically and we're doing this following all best practices.
I think that sums it up nicely. We have the opportunity to continue this discussion in a little bit more of a direct, interactive way. So I'm going to have Jenny pop on here and give you those directions. And I want to thank Holly and Dr. Sylvia Schneider-Fox so much for joining us for this great panel. And you'll have the opportunity to speak with them both once we kind of end this presentation. You're back at your table. So thank you both so much.
Hi, everybody. So we're about to lose this presentation mode. We'll sneak out of this presentation mode, and you'll be back at the tables that you were probably in at the very beginning of this presentation. Little tables that look just like little dollhouse tables with little chairs around them. If you'd like to change the table you're at, you just click on any open seat at another table anywhere on the floor. You'll notice that some of the tables have names or labels assigned to them, and those are just an idea of the topic that might be discussed at that table. So if you want to talk about more about stigma and stereotypes with some surrogates, with either Lisa or with Holly, then you'll look for those tables and you'll go ahead and move to that table. If you want to talk more about advocacy with Ron, then you're going to go and look for Ron and advocacy at his table. Sylvia's table has some research focus if you want to talk with her about research. There are also just some general topic tables, so you can go ahead and go to one of those. You can meet other professionals or intended parents, because we do have both professionals and intended parents with us today, and you can discuss what you'd like to with those people. And then you also have other surrogates with us today, and of course anyone is welcome to make your own group. In the top right-hand corner is the help desk, and that's where I will be if you have any problems moving around, or if you have questions about how to access anything, or if you have any questions about tomorrow's, the rest of the conference for the rest of the weekend, tomorrow or Sunday, you can go ahead and see me there, and I'll be happy to help out. Ron, do you have any closing words for us before we go to the floor? Ron, you're muted.
Muted.
First of all, thank you so much. I think I speak for a lot of people that this has been a unique and maybe unprecedented look with a lot of insights and, of course, hard work that went into the survey, and really a perspective that goes beyond what we typically have the time or the ability to cover at our conferences. The conferences are more prescriptive. I mean, those who come tomorrow will know that the focus is going to be helping you, those who are considering surrogacy, know how and what you might be getting into. But today was about perspective, which is something we want to do a lot more. We have parents panels. We've had teen panels before, including children of surrogates last year in New York. And that's something we really would like to do a lot more. It is, today that we saw that there's a lot of also professionalism that we depend on, and passion. And this is really what we feel very strongly about, the fact that this is a community of professionals and not-for-profits who are getting together because we really want and we focused on helping other people become parents. So our next Advocacy and Research Forum in New York, in person, will be in September, where we're going to look at the intensifying commercialization of this field. Something that still perhaps is only in the margins, but it is, everything you heard today is not in any way enshrined in law. There's no regulation that claims that what Sylvia is doing when she's reviewing surrogates, when she's screening surrogates, has to be done in a particular code. It's all because the best practices are what motivates and what is respected by a lot of people in the community. But every now and then we hear about agencies that are snatching a surrogate that's been turned down after psychological screening that she didn't pass, or bidding wars for surrogates, or investment and private equity going into this, mergers, acquisitions, marketplaces. So we're going to talk about how and what we can do, what is happening and what we can do, once again, not together, not by ourselves as a not-for-profit, but also with the help of the professional community and the intended parents, what we can do to keep us more focused on this mission, because we don't want this to be, a business. So please stay with us, talk to us at the upcoming session that Jenny just described. Each time we do have a different topic, but the topic we discussed last time in February about fertility equality is an ongoing task and a mission of ours, trying to reduce overall costs of surrogacy. And those of you interested in that are welcome to stop by the table I'll be at, among other advocacy issues we mentioned, as this goes beyond just the forum and is something that we would like to get your help in achieving. So thank you so much. We'll see. I know many of you tomorrow as well. And now we'll see you at the tables.